PlanGrid is actually part of Autodesk. And essentially, PlanGrid, just to give you a bit of an overview, it's productivity software essentially. It's a field tool so that you've got information at your fingertips. You can take it to site, do all that sort of real-time data capture. That's essentially what PlanGrid's about. Obviously, what I'm going to be talking about is digital collaboration. So I'll try not to sell PlanGrid to you, although I might mention PlanGrid a couple of times, potentially. But essentially, it's just want to talk about how technology can enable you to get better, more reliable outcomes. Just as an agenda, just going to talk about sort of industry challenges, what's going on across the industry, the impact that technology has, and just looking at some sort of technology trends as well with what's going on today and in the future. So yeah, there's going to be a couple of slides coming up, and you may have seen these kind of stats previously, but there's quite a few people, shockingly, they haven't. But it's quite, just looking at those numbers there, construction is one of the most difficult industries. The infrastructure sector in particular, with all those different mega projects that are going on. Those stats, albeit very high, essentially what that's telling you is, the larger the project, the more complex the project, the bigger the problems. So even the smaller projects have these problems, probably not to that degree. Essentially, for construction, efficiently and effectively designing, building, and maintaining infrastructure is obviously vital, and it requires key players to come together. And I've heard already with a couple of the talks earlier around standards and processes and establishing those. And this gentleman over here mentioned, it's not about just following a leader on a project. And so many times on a project, especially the larger projects where you attract that talent, those projects tend to be a little bit more successful. But the industry is really about all these smaller projects and the supply chain. So the stats are pretty shocking. This is also might be quite a bit of a surprise to you. So construction is also one of the least digitized industries. We're thereabouts with agriculture, and it's not great really when you look at something like that. Albeit in the last few years things really have picked up, but we're still way off. When you look at the top there with ICT, media and finance, they're really doing things that's driven by like advanced analytics, machine learning, all that kind of stuff, which really across our industry, it's only really touched upon in pockets across the industry. So we're quite some way away. Obviously, industry's been slow to adapt. And essentially that lack of digitization means that when you need that information on a day-to-day basis, you haven't got it. And that essentially means that you're not working collaboratively. Technology means that you can work collaboratively, and working collaboratively means that you can be productive. And so that sort of productivity element, which I think was mentioned earlier on as well, should improve. So that goes nicely into this slide. But obviously there's no coincidence here that obviously our industry is one of the least productive as well. So I know it's a bit of doom and gloom, but these are facts. I'd say essentially there's a massive opportunity. Autodesk are doing pretty well with people buying our solutions. Essentially, through digital collaboration, you can make significant gains. And those significant gains can even be specifically just through mobile technology. And all of us, pretty much everyone will have a smartphone, and we pretty much use it on a daily basis. If you've got an iPhone, if you swipe towards the right, it'll tell you how productive you've been. I looked at mine earlier and it's been 5% since this morning, so I've not been very productive. But essentially, technology is an enabler. So it's going to enable you to be more collaborative. So we carried out a study with Construction Manager magazine, I think earlier last year. And essentially it was just to figure out what the general sort of frustrations are across the industry. A lot of it is very much obvious, but now you've actually got some sort of solid facts. So one of the questions we asked was, what are the biggest factors affecting productivity in particular? And it really is around that lack of trust, poor collaboration, those manual processes, things being done in a very much paper-based way, projects and businesses not really being driven by data. And data is key. Everyone's, I think, pretty much heard of big data. I mentioned technology improves collaboration, collaboration improves productivity, and productivity is a massive factor. Technology can, and again, based on a study done by McKinsey, can have up to 15% improvement on productivity. And I've highlighted it there. It's actually that in terms of all the possible opportunities, technology is the biggest factor. And then cost savings of up to 6%. May not seem much, but in the grand scheme of things, on a massive project, that's a lot of money. I don't think there's too many people that need convincing that technology, does improve collaboration, as well as then having that sort of knock-on effect with improving productivity as well. But saying that, there's still a lack of investment in the industry. In comparison to a couple of those industries I mentioned before with media, ICT, and so on, we're still behind around 2 to 3% in terms of what we spend, our sort of revenue. I think it's actually less than 1% generally companies are spending towards technology. And technology generally, construction costs generally, around 75% are on site. So if you can make a difference on site, then that, especially as I mentioned before with the supply chain, then if you can get their buy-in, then that's going to have an impact on collaboration. And there you can see 10% of technology is spent on site. So some sort of shocking figures. Mobile technology, so you can kind of see where I'm going with this. PlanGrid is a mobile application, but PlanGrid's actually the most adopted sort of site tool that there is out there, and it's making a difference to those guys who are on site, who are actually doing the job. They're actually building and so on. It's a supply chain where you really need to be able to get the buy-in. It's a very fragmented industry as it is. We're seeing a lot of our customers are building into their contracts that you have to use the technology. We're following a BIM mandate, so you have to do things in a certain way. And a lot of you, no doubt, again, I've come across BIM. It's made already a massive difference to the industry, but saying that, it's making an impact, especially on larger projects where there is that talent's being attracted, where there is that investment. But the difference needs to be made on those smaller projects and with the supply chain. And that's where simple mobile applications can make a difference. Picking the right technology matters. You need to be able to build from the right information. You need to be able to collaborate and track progress and changes and so on. What we're finding, across speaking with our customers, it's not really about. It's not a question of do you have a digital solution. It's do you have the best digital solution. That's more of the sort of conversations that we're having there. Just again, by a show of hands, be interesting to see on any of the projects that you've worked. Are you using some form of like mobile application or some sort of site tool? Yeah, it's not too bad. It's not too bad, but it goes to show we are still quite a way behind. So, just going to talk a little bit about what today's technologies are, what's out there, and what's becoming more and more prevalent on our sites. Essentially, technology is enabling those better and more reliable outcomes. CDE, again, another sort of possibly another buzzword. but essential for collaborative working. But it's pretty much, I'd say, essential now. You need to have a cloud-based solution to be able to bring all stakeholders together in one place where there's a single source of truth, where you're accessing your drawings, your documents, and so on. Everything's in one place. And when it comes to the O&M aspect of the project, it's easy to get to that data that you need. And as well as that, and in conjunction with your CDE, it's having that site application as well. And when you bring those two things together, and they're fully integrated, ideally, it should mean success. And we had a customer at one of our sort of Autodesk University events. It's actually Interserve, and they essentially, this is exactly what they were talking about, and it helped them to drive their project to be actually delivered 6 weeks ahead of schedule. And this is Interserve. There's been a lot being said about Interserve, but they've got the standards in place, they've got the processes in place, and they're using technology as an enabler. Again, drones. It's one of those things where, again, you're hearing about it, but they're actually making a difference. There's tangible benefits there, whether it be just through surveying and planning, just tracking progress on site, thermal imaging, whatever it may be. All of that data that's captured, you then put it through a platform that everyone is able to come together, and that information shared, managed, and so on. VR and AR. Only a few years ago, when I was working at Carillion, for me this was a gimmick. I'll be completely honest with you, I thought it was just a gimmick, but I've seen the tangible benefits. I was actually standing in a VR box just the other day where I've got projectors all around me and I'm able to see where I am in the project. And just purely from a visualization aspect, where I could be standing there with a number of other contractors, maybe with the client, it's that collaborative element. So you're able to do things well before the project's actually being built. And there's, if there are any mistakes, do it at that point in time, with things like coordination and clash detection. Again, I read something just recently, you can make that mistake at design and it might cost you, £1. And then when it comes down to doing it on site, that's 20 quid. But when you actually look at those figures, it's 20x. That could be you could be in big trouble, essentially. And that industry is expected to be a $100 billion industry in just a couple of years. It's really going far. And let's look at tomorrow's technology. Offsite Prefab, or DFMA, whatever you want to call it, essentially being able to do things off-site in a controlled environment. And it's collaborative. It's using that process that's available through BIM. It's essentially a methodology. You're doing things right off-site. It's more controlled. You're improving quality as well as safety. The level of resource doesn't have to be as much. All of these factors, we're seeing the difference on various sites. I've seen the difference on one of the sites that I worked on a couple of years ago, just from basically precast concrete being brought to site. It's essentially just speeding up that process. But it's that collaborative nature at the very beginning. It's that front-end loading when it comes to design. That's then you're reaping the benefits, you're reaping the dividends at the end. Robotics. I'm not talking about RoboCop or anything like that, but more to do with just generally, even like exoskeleton robotic suits. I don't know if anyone's come across those, which can just essentially it's almost like a vest that you can wear, and it just helps you to maybe if it's manual handling or something like that, something that's really labor intensive, or maybe it's a machine that's helping you lay some bricks. This is the kind of stuff that's going on at the moment. And I've put 3D print in there as well. Quite literally, there's things are being 3D printed right now. And you can just imagine how much time that's saving. But again, all that effort with the front-end loading when it comes to design, that collaborative nature at the very start, the dividends are reaped towards the end. So essentially what this all comes down to is, and again, having spoken to our customers, essentially it's these 5 things. You want to improve quality, you want to reduce your safety issues, reduce cost, ideally deliver projects ahead of schedule, and winning work. Essentially that's what it comes down to. And I absolutely do believe that collaboration is not just a buzzword, but it is a real deal. And I believe that technology plays a massive impact in driving that as an enabler.